Welcome to Tentative Title with Tim. This is a podcast about creativity, about process, about filmmaking, and about screenwriting. Welcome, everybody, to the podcast. So if you were in the United States, we celebrated 4th of July yesterday, and I hope you had a chance to spend time with some family. Got to see some cool fireworks and have barbecues and all that kind of stuff. I hope it felt like a normal year, a normal holiday. I hope. So, but that's not I am here to talk about hope, obviously. But now I want to talk about an issue that I've been thinking about for a couple weeks now. And where this stems from is this idea of like the mantle, of passing on the mantle to someone else. And more specifically, when you have an actor who has been playing a character for a very long time, at what point do they hand that over to somebody else? Or should they? Or are there characters that it doesn't work to actually pass the mantle on for? I bring this up specifically because so Indiana Jones 5 started production, and unfortunately Harrison Ford hurt himself. He hurt his shoulder, and there's been talk about how they have to kind of halt production, at least for anything that they need to do with him, for 3 months, possibly 6 months. It's like the speculation keeps building and building depending on how severe his injury is, and the fact that he's I think 80 or something. Like, he's really up there, and the character of Indiana Jones requires so much physicality that to have him just as an actor do all these stunts, like, does that make any sense? And the conversation is still going on about whether or not it's a good idea to even have Harrison Ford play Indiana Jones, like, at all. So I wanted to kind of bridge off of that main idea of, like, well, when an actor gets to be a certain age and they have played a character for so long, is there a point at which they should give that character over to somebody else, especially if it's a franchise? And I think more specifically about James Bond. Sean Connery started off the James Bond series, and then at a certain point, whether or not he wanted to do it or if his contract ran out or whatever, they passed it on to somebody else, and then they passed it on to somebody else after that. And so there's this expectation with the character of James Bond that it's going to be played by multiple people. And the reason why is because, well, they kind of already set that precedent. Like, the mantle has been passed many times, and so the expectation is that whoever gets to play James Bond, they get maybe 3 or 4 movies at which they get a chance to play that character, and then they pass it on to somebody else. And in a way, that's quite genius, because it means the character can live on forever. Just as long as there are stories to tell, that character can exist almost forever. And that's great. That gives an opportunity for anybody who had wanted to play that character to possibly play that character. But it also means that, you don't have to worry about when an actor gets older, that they kind of have a certain amount of films in them to play that character, because it's also a very physically demanding role to play. And, the same thing could be said for like Spider-Man or Batman, or like all these superheroes, like Superman. They've all had multiple actors play these characters. Now granted, like, we're talking about more of a superhuman kind of like roles and stuff like that. But I mean, they've rebooted the characters so many times that there's this expectation that you could make another Batman movie and just find another actor to put in there, and everybody, like, they may be frustrated about it, but ultimately people are going to accept it because they've already set a precedent that multiple people can play Batman. And I mean, to kind of bring this into even another layer of it is that, you know, you may be saying, well, James Bond is more of a code name. It's more of a symbol that anybody can put upon themselves and be the 007, which is true. Like it's a code name that anybody can be necessarily, but ultimately it's like, it's James Bond. It's supposed to be James Bond. It's not supposed to be anybody else, because if it was somebody else, they would have a 00 whatever. Like they would have another code name instead of playing 007. And the same thing with Batman. Like Bruce Wayne is Bruce Wayne and Batman is Batman. But, you know, since there are different worlds, they can have different versions of the character. But this specific example of Indiana Jones, and even just talking specifically about Harrison Ford and being able to play like Han Solo, like they tried to cast somebody else to play Han Solo. Granted, it was a younger Han Solo, and it had varying results, but I think a lot of people, it took people a little while to kind of warm up to the idea of somebody else playing Han Solo, because up until this point, it had always been Harrison Ford. And now it's the same thing with Indiana Jones. And, you know, Harrison Ford has said that, like, Indiana Jones is one of his favorite characters, which is why he keeps coming back to play that part. I mean, granted, it looks like a very fun part to play, so I don't blame him. But now, where do we go from here? Like, in Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, there was this expectation, or at least the way it seemed in the movie, that they were gonna pass the mantle on to Shia LaBeouf, to Mutt, so that they could continue the adventures with him. But with Shia LaBeouf's career and how there was kind of a fallout, and, you know, so that plan, which may have been a really great plan at the time, fell through. And the film itself suffered as well, because it wasn't as good as the other three. But that's besides the point. So now, what do we do with the character of Indiana Jones? Like, does he get one more film if this film is finished? And what happens after that? Do they just retire the character? Do they start, you know, rehashing the young Indiana Jones Chronicles, which could be a really great idea. The show itself was really cool, and, you know, why would they not want to continue on these adventures in one way or another? But there's also speculation that maybe this film is going to be the Indiana Jones passing the mantle to somebody else. And, you know, the details are very sparse right now, so it's going to be hard to tell, and we won't know until the movie is released and we get to see, like, what actually happens. But the people involved with the production, the producers and the director, I mean, I'm sure they all know that, like, this is going to have to be the last film that Harrison Ford does as this character. And how are they going to set up passing that mantle on to another actor, and how are people going to, like, it's going to be a very careful process of making sure that whoever they pass it to is somebody that the audience is going to, you know, going to accept, and they're going to say, yeah, this makes sense. Like, this character doing this and passing this on makes sense. And yes, I want to see more adventures with the person that they pass it on to. But it's tough, because, like, they could have actually done this earlier. Like, they, you know, at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, like, they all ride into the sunset. It was a perfect way to end the trilogy. and it was a beautiful way to end those films. And then, yeah, the Crystal Skull came out, and like it's like, okay, we're gonna get more adventures with Indy. This is exciting. And then it kind of didn't do what I think all of us wanted it to do, which was to get us excited about the character again. And it's just, as much as I wanted to love the film, and I really did, like I watched it multiple times just trying to be like, okay, what is going on with this film? Why is it not hitting me the way that the other films did? Like, is it just because I'm older, more cynical, or what? Like, well, what is happening with this film that, like, I'm not excited. I'm not as excited about it, and it doesn't seem like a fully Indiana Jones, story. And I think a lot of people are just kind of like, I don't know if this we don't know what this is. So that would have been a great time, even if the fandom was like really pissed off about it, to just say, okay, this character of Indiana Jones, like he lived in these 3 films, and he lived in the novels, and he lived in the video games, but now we need to pass it on to somebody else because Harrison Ford is getting older, and we need to it's more important to have longevity for the character than it is to fulfill anybody's like ego or what. Of course, at the time, Harrison Ford wasn't as old, so I'm sure it was like, hey, this is the perfect time to do it. We've all been wanting to do a 4th one since since the last one came out, which I think was like 20 years or something. Like, there was a big chunk of time between The Last Crusade and Crystal Skull. Like, there was so much they could have done within that time, and it just sounded like they just couldn't get their, like all 3 of them, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Harrison Ford, couldn't get on the same page about a story that they all wanted to tell. And so that's why I kind of floundered for a while. But yeah, so I'm curious what you guys think about this, because I do think that there are characters that you can set up to have longevity, and then there are other characters that you set up that they can only be played by one actor, and they maybe they're only meant to be in a handful of movies, and they're not to try to extend the lifespan of some characters. It doesn't really make any sense, because they're only meant to live within that finite amount of time within these certain stories, and trying to like extend that just weakens the character. It doesn't, or there isn't enough story there for that character to live in. And so why try to like milk this character, or like beat a dead horse when you've already kind of like you've already told their story. We're starting to see that a lot just with like the origin stories. It's like, yeah, let's go back and let's tell the origin story of so and such a character, and it's like, do we really need to? Like, nobody is asking for the origin story of some of these characters. And I mean, like, even though, like, maybe multiple people have played the character, and so, like, like, there's an expectation that, obviously you're going to find a younger actor or actress to play the character. But still, it's like, why? Do we really need this? Like, is this really necessary? But I don't know. Some origin stories are that I thought were unexpected and unnecessary ended up being some really popular pieces of storytelling that fleshed out a character in the long run. So yeah, I'm fascinated by this, because I for one, like I've had an expectation for certain characters to have longevity, and then I didn't really think about how certain characters may not actually be able to live on, because they are only identified with the actors and actresses that play them. And so what happens when those actors and actresses reach a certain age in which they can't play those characters anymore? And what do you do with that? And because that's a real world thing. Like, eventually these actors and actresses are going to pass away. It's going to be very sad, but they're, like, if they are those characters, then what happens? What happens with those characters? Like, are you forced to retire them? Are you, is there a way to, reboot them in the future when, everybody has kind of dealt with the grief of them passing away, and it's now, like some years have gone by where you can reintroduce another actor in that character and continue those adventures? Like, that might have to be the case with with some of these things, and especially with like Indiana Jones. Like, eventually Harrison Ford is going to pass away, and I'm going to be very, very sad about it, because he was so much a part of like the movies that I watched growing up. Like, he was the guy, he was the action hero that I was just like, oh my gosh, like, not only is he like the everyman, but it's like he looks like a guy that, like, I could I could grow up to be, like, to talk about, putting, seeing yourself in a character, like, like many times I was like, wow, it would be really, like, the characters that he played were like everyman, action star. And I'm like, wow, like, when I grow up, to be able to go on these adventures, to be able to, like, see the world in this way. I mean, I don't plan to, stop world domination or anything, because, like, I don't think I'm I'd be in a position to do that. But it's just, if I was to go into an adventure, it's like, wow, Harrison Ford, like was, to be able to see myself in like in the characters that he plays, just like, I could identify with that. I could identify with the sense of adventure and go into the edge of the galaxy or edge of the world where, like, I've never been before, and stuff like that. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. I'm getting a bit like nostalgic about it, and I guess in a way trying to prepare myself for the inevitable when it comes to just the actors that I grew up with, like, watching them get older, watching them not being able to be as vibrant as they were when I first saw them on the screen. And film is the one medium in which, like, we can revisit our youth. We can revisit the youth of others. We can revisit these moments, over and over and over again. And if anything, it's like, it's being able to, like, to have this hopefully permanent legacy that is preserved, for hundreds of years, and people, in the future can look back and see these characters, and it's like, see the, like, Tom Cruise and Harrison Ford and Denzel Washington, and just all these great actors, and be able to, like, study their work and have it be an example of, like, of some really prime acting, so. Anyway, I'm getting way off topic here, but the idea is that, I wonder about that. Like, the mantle is going to have to be passed on to somebody else. And does that work with every character? And if it does, how to do that properly so that the audience will accept it and continue to support the character and continue to come out and see the movies or the shows or whatever media it happens to, like, be a part of, like, that transition to somebody else. And I hope they do it right. I hope with Indiana Jones, if it is a passing the mantle kind of film that we're about to see, I hope not only they give Indiana Jones a great send-off and really have him ride into the sunset in a very respectful way, but I hope whoever they pass it to, that it's like, I'll sit in the theater and just be like, yes, I can't wait to see another adventure. I can't wait to see more of this new, like, whoever it is. I can't, like, I'm excited about the next phase of this story because of who they pass it on to. And I want to be excited. That's the whole thing about all of this, is like, I want to be excited again. And I know it's not always going to be like when I first saw these characters, but I do know that I can be excited about something. I can be excited about the next phase of adventures and films, and there's a right way to do it. And you just know when you know. Like, it's you know when you're sitting in the theater and you're watching and you're like, yes, the filmmakers get who this character is. They get what the adventure is about. They're not trying to like pepper with all this extra crap. They just know. They know what this is, and they're not trying to make it something that it's not. And that's exciting. That gets me to want to show up to see the next installment. Like, that is storytelling. That is what it's supposed to be. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for tuning in week to week and listening to me ramble on about stuff. But I mean, like, these are the things that I get excited about. These are the things that I just think about in a week in and week out. I'm just kind of like, wow, I am so lucky to be able to be in an industry at which, like, we get to inspire people. We get to, tell stories. We get to just have adventures. We get to do things that, in the regular mundane world, like, we don't get to do that often. But when we go we're able to, like, write these adventures and write these stories with these great characters. Like, it's exciting. It's really exciting, and it gets people to kind of like feel good about their lives and to feel like, like they can aspire to be something more, if they just work hard enough, or to have, just like all the aspirational feelings and thoughts about just being a good person and just like, just trying to do good in the world. You know what I mean? So, anyway, guys, that's all I got for this week, and I will talk to you on the next one. And also, if you want to connect with me, I have an email for the podcast. It's tentative.title.with.tim.podcast@gmail.com. Also, I have a Twitter account for the podcast where I post episodes, and that is @title_Tim. And you can find also on the Facebook page, I have a page for the podcast, so you can connect with me there. Looking forward to hearing from all of you, and until then, I'll catch you on the next one.